You start.
The COVID-19 pandemic put nations into lockdown for several months at a time. While this was necessary to prevent the spread of the disease, there were ultimately unintended consequences to people staying at home for long periods of time. Specifically, it became hard to eat healthy. Hello, my name is Jason Barlow, and my presentation is on the effects of the COVID-19 lockdown on the nutrition of Randolph County high school students. Yaoshan Dun, a cardiovascular researcher who works at Xingya Hospital in China, surveyed 12,889 Chinese college students and found that the average weight gain over a four-month lockdown period was 4.9 pounds. For comparison, the average weight gain for general populations is just 1/3 of a pound, meaning that over this 4-month period, there is a 4.6 pound difference in the amount of weight people were gaining, according to this research. Similarly, Italian researcher Mariana Pellegrini researched a group of Italian people and during a 1-month lockdown and found that 40% increased their food consumption during it and 50% increased their sugar consumption during it. Well, why did this occur? People were no longer forced to eat breakfast before school or work, and they were no longer forced to eat their lunch set at a designated time by their school or work, meaning that they could eat whenever they wanted, and they were no longer forced to eat dinner shortly after arriving at home and before bed. They had direct access to the fridge 24/7, allowing them to just constantly grab stuff at any time. Furthermore, according to Brian Dees, the director of the National Economic Council of the United States under Joe Biden, the price of beef increased by 14% during the pandemic, the price of pork increased by 12.1% during the pandemic, and the price of chicken increased by 6.6% during the pandemic. If consumers see price increases in healthy options that are necessary to gaining protein, they might turn to these more unhealthy options such as frozen foods high in fat, or high in sodium, or other foods high in sugar. However, it has been proven that not all populations gained unhealthy eating habits during the pandemic. In fact, some populations actually improved their eating habits. Federica Grant, who works at the Korea Research Center for Food and Nutrition, found that a group of Italian subjects increased their consumption of legumes, fruits, vegetables, and whole grains during the pandemic. Well, why did this occur? Not enough research has been conducted on it to give a definitive answer, but some theorize that certain cultures value healthy eating more than others, meaning that they dedicate more time to preparing healthy meals. The only place so let's look at where it has been researched. Only places in the U.S. have been researched are California and Massachusetts, these more urban areas. And places outside the U.S. have been researched such as Italy and China, but rural areas within the United States have not been researched so far. And let's also look at who has been researched. Mostly adults have been researched so far. High school students have really not been researched on this topic. And there are a few studies out there published based on them, but the research is overall minimal. Randolph County is a rural county within the U.S. that was affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. High schools were shut down. Residents were forced to pay more food for necessary healthy food items. And according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, in February 2020, the employment rate was 64,577, which decreased to 52,353 in April 2020. Studying the eating habits of Randolph County high school students can help close the gap in the research, because we can see people had to overall pay more for these healthy food items, and they were subject to the lockdown. Urban areas, suburban areas, and locations outside of the United States are vastly different culturally, economically, geographically, and ethnically than areas in the rural South like Randolph County, meaning there's a large possibility of there being differentiations in the research that has been conducted in Randolph County versus the places outside of it. To explore the issue, I designed a survey that will be sent to 10th, 11th, and 12th grade students, but not 9th graders, because 9th graders they did not experience the COVID-19 pandemic during high school. They were in middle school when this occurred, for the most part. The survey was used to collect quantitative data because that is what was used by most other researchers who focused on the changes of eating habits during the COVID-19 pandemic. The anonymous survey consisted of 6 items that asked participants about how their eating habits changed during the pandemic. The first item asked if students had lost, gained, or maintained weight. In the next 5 items, students were given a statement and asked to state their level of agreement with the statement. For example, this statement says, during the COVID-19 lockdown, I ate fast food more often than before the lockdown. The students were given this statement, and they were asked to select strongly disagree, neutral, agree, or strongly agree. I believe that by providing this style of question, I was able to mitigate error, because students may have not remembered exactly how their eating habits changed during the pandemic, but this question allowed me to ask them about it while still getting significant data on my end while not asking too much from them. The most notable data was from the statement that read, during the COVID-19 lockdown, I ate snacks more often than before the lockdown. 15.6% had selected that they strongly agreed with the statement, and 46.7% selected that they agreed with the statement, meaning that 62.3% agreed in total that they ate snacks more often than before the lockdown. This was the only question in the survey, actually, where a majority of people, more than 50%, chose to agree with the statement. So this is my most significant piece of data so far. This data supports the research of researcher Amber Hammonds, who examined 14 Californian families with children between the ages 5 and 18 during the lockdown, and observed that nearly all of the children increased the frequency at which they ate snacks. Both my study and Amber Hammond's study found similar results in different areas because they were no longer, they lost their meal structure, they were no longer forced to eat at designated times, their fridge and pantry were always available to them. Well, also, the next 3 statements are all related to each other. 44.5% of the students who took the survey agreed that they ate more sugary foods than before the lockdown. 34.0% of students felt that they ate more chips than before the lockdown. And 38.5% of students felt that they ate fast food more often than before the lockdown. So overall, the data here suggests that the quality of food that Randolph County high school students were eating decreased. The high school students had more control over what they ate, and they could eat at any time they wanted, essentially, because they were at school, or they were at home when they were doing school, and at school you can't just grab anything at any time. Moreover, high school students eat lunch from the cafeteria, the school cafeteria, where meals are standardized to include a balance between protein, dairy, fruit, vegetable, and grain. On the other hand, students who attend remotely can make a cup of ramen filled with sodium or a sugary bowl of cereal for one of their meals and deal with that. Moreover, Randolph County high school students may have changed their eating habits due to financial reasons. It was previously mentioned that the prices of beef, pork, and poultry all increased during the pandemic, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And the number of employed people during the pandemic also decreased by 10,000 within Randolph County, which people may have had a harder time affording these healthy food options and again turned to these unhealthy options, high in sodium, sugar, fat, and all these other things that are not good for you. This conclusion is supported by another researcher, Caitlin Daniel, who studied 49 low-income families and found that they often fed their children fast food because it was significantly more cheap and significantly more convenient than preparing a healthy meal. On the other hand, some of the data suggests that there were improvements in eating habits. 30.3% felt that they consumed less sugar during the pandemic, 37.1% felt that they consumed less chips during the pandemic, and 37.0% felt that they consumed less fast food during the pandemic. And to add on to this, 31.1% of participants stated that they lost weight during the pandemic, and 28.8% of participants estimated they consumed less calories per day during the pandemic. The findings of my research are similar to that of the aforementioned Federica Grant, who found that people were consuming more legumes, fruits, and vegetables and whole grains. There are multiple reasons why people may have started to eat healthier. For instance, people had more time to prepare healthy meals, as mentioned before. There were also social media trends where people showed off oatmeal bowls, salad dishes, and fruit or vegetable smoothies that may have influenced people to start a trend of eating healthier. Additionally, social media influencer accounts in the form of chef accounts appeared on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and other forms of video that showed off healthy dishes that may have looked appealing to the viewers. However, it's important to emphasize that additional research would need to be conducted to definitively determine the cause of people eating healthier during the lockdowns. well, okay. The results of my study indicate that the number of students who gain healthy eating habits is similar to the number of students who gain unhealthy eating habits during the pandemic. In other words, the pandemic affected students' eating habits very differently depending on the individual and depending on just who they are as a person and what they decided to do. Did they decide to go out and start to eat healthier, or did they decide to maybe let loose a little? Notably, the data is only a small step towards a larger understanding because it only applies to Randolph County, North Carolina, rather than all rural areas within the United States. Again, additional research would need to be conducted in order to determine the effects, if the effects are unanimous. There were some limitations in the data, unfortunately. There was a total of 135 survey responses. While it is a decent amount, there could have been more because I sent my survey to 8 schools, and only 2 of the 8 schools actually responded to the survey. As you can see here are the 8 schools listed. Only Southwestern Randolph High School and Randolph Early College were responded to the survey, while it was sent to all 6 other public schools within Randolph County, within the Randolph County school system. The COVID restrictions forced me to send out the surveys via email rather than actually going to the schools, explaining the surveys, and handing them out myself, which I believe theoretically would allow me to get more responses, increasing the quantity and quality of my data. Well, if the results from the survey accurately reflect the eating habit, how the eating habits of Randolph County high school students have changed, there's a potential for some citizens to develop obesity. Obesity increases the risk. There is no way to know for certain if some students of Randolph County will continue to eat unhealthy, but poor eating habits can lead to obesity if they persist over a long period of time. Obesity increases the risk of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and other complications that make living more difficult and even lead to death. And this is important because rural areas are key cornerstones to the United States economy. They house nearly all of the country's agricultural and lumber industries, making it important to continue this society and make people continue to grow up into healthy individuals to continue this successful economy. In other words, for the survival of the United States and its people, it must be determined how eating habits have changed within rural areas. Well, let's look at some of the ways we can solve the problem. To solve the problem, it might be helpful to raise awareness of the issue within the area so that we can get to the help, so people can get the help they need in order to live a healthier lifestyle. The first step to solving a problem is realizing that there is in fact a problem at all. Moreover, in order to combat the presence of convenient yet unhealthy fast food restaurants, new fast food chains can be created that would serve healthy food for cheap. These healthy fast food restaurants could market themselves towards children and adolescents, which would allow them to set a trend of eating healthy, as similar to how McDonald's, Chick-fil-A, and Burger King, and all these other fast food restaurants are high in popularity. We need to create restaurants that could also be high in popularity and hip with the kids. Likewise, the government or private industries could fund vending machines that serve tasty yet healthy fast food options to people at work or school. People at work and school often, they don't have access to a meal all the time, and people may miss having access to this meal all the time during the pandemic. But providing these vending machines could allow people to always have a healthy snack at their disposal. And rather than serving something like a candy bar or chips, these could serve something like a salad. Ultimately, based on my research and the research within the body of knowledge, it is plausible that the eating habits of some Randolph County high school students worsen. For the future of the United States, it is crucial to consider and support the health of these Randolph County high school students. Thank you.
Great job. Excellent done.
All right, so Mr. Hodgins is going to ask you your first question.
Sounds good.
So how did you determine which results generated by your research method were most important in informing your new understanding?
Well, I had to look at the results that had the majority of responses. So I presented my first survey response question that said that 62.3% of students began to eat healthier during the pandemic. 62.3% of students began to snack more during the pandemic. And I knew that it was more important to consider this piece of data than the one that only was in the 30% range. And than some of the other data points that were only in the 30% range, because that was the only one with the majority. And also, I knew that I had to consider that all of my responses had at least some sort of error, just because of relatively low response pool.
How does your new understanding address the gap in the scholarly conversation?
Well, it was previously mentioned that not a lot of rural areas within the, actually no rural areas have been researched so far, and the areas that have been researched were California by Kaylin Daniels, and Massachusetts by another researcher, and areas outside of the US, such as Italy by Mariana Pellegrini, and areas in China researched by Yashin Dunn, but places within the rural areas within the US have not been researched at all. And I researched in Randolph County, North Carolina, which is a rural area within the US, so that is different on that end. And furthermore, almost all of the studies I presented within this only presented research conducted on adults. Research on high school students specifically had not been researched at all.
What was the most important research skill you developed as a result of this process, and how might you apply it to your future endeavors?
I would say the most important research process that I learned was the ability to adapt to new situations and learn myself. What I mean by that is there were some points during the research process where I wasn't exactly sure what to do. So I knew that I had to feel comfortable asking my teacher, I had to feel comfortable looking at videos online, looking at the example papers provided. I really learned how to use my resources during this time. And this doesn't apply to just researching in my college days. It also applies to my job. When I'm uncertain of how to do something, I really got to look into it. It is really important to make sure that I know how to do it on my own and know how to get the help I need.
All right, good job.